and I'm joined now by Mal in the studio. Thank you for being with us today.
It's a pleasure, Amy. Nice to see you again.
It's lovely to have you on the programme with us. Now, before we get into some of the details of this report, can you tell us more about the inspiration around the report? And do you have any major concerns about how technology is advancing?
Yes, well, technologies, particularly now, we talk a lot about machine learning and artificial intelligence and all that comes from that, create some great opportunities, which we'll look at, I'm sure, in a moment. But there are also some major challenges, particularly as we invite technology into our bodies through things like human implants, where we start to lose the line, as it were, between human and machine, between humanity and its tools. And the question is that line even important anymore? I happen to believe it is for many reasons. But there are also questions like the data that we generate. Sometimes we forget that in using these digital technologies connected via the cloud, we're actually creating oceans of data which can be used, for example, in interconnecting global databases in the fight against things like disease or organized crime or terrorism. But those databases can be used in ways that we're not particularly approving of. So technology creep can set in and we end up with a situation we didn't envisage. So we need very tight sets of ethics on what we will and won't allow with AI, for example, but we need regulations then to back those up. And they need to be very resilient and international regulations.
Now, I'd like to start by looking at AI biometrics, as we're seeing a rise in facial and voice recognition, which could be used to help identify fraud. But do you have concerns over privacy and how this might be used for public behaviour modifications?
Yes, just a bit of background. I think this year we'll take it one step further than things like facial, voice and gait recognition, which, as you say, we have already, because we now have 3D face recognition being tested for the police, for other uses. It's going to be very helpful in the ways you've enumerated, but it can also be used to, quote, read emotions based on subtle facial muscular movements. So, it'll be good for doctors as they try to gauge a patient's general health. It'd be good for police to track criminals, but it could also be used in predictive policing, where suspected criminals are tracked for signs of intent to commit a crime even before a crime's been committed. And that poses great challenges for human rights. And we have the challenge, too, of AI face recognition now being tested for augmented reality glasses. They have inbuilt cameras and data connectivity and the capacity to search for information online on anyone they photograph and then publish that data onto the lens of a pair of glasses. So basically, a wearer can find out all about you while just looking at you in the street. And you can imagine what, in a negative situation, police services might do with that, especially in an age where citizens seem to be encouraged to report each other for even the slightest perceived insult in the name of preventing hate crime. So, yeah, there are great dangers. Behaviour modification is another subject. We can tackle that if you like. But even in the smallest things, these devices, as I said, can be used in ways we hadn't foreseen if we don't watch them carefully.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how this could impact behaviour modification? I am interested to hear.
Yeah, well, if you look at the example of China, China is the world leader in behaviour modification through AI and other technologies. We could open the door here, if we're not careful, to the Chinese system of citizen ranking, which is perhaps the worst type of privacy invasion. The government in China, in certain regions of China, but they're looking to roll it out nationally, surveils communities and then offers benefits to citizens who seem to be behaving in government-approved ways. And it restricts opportunities to people who don't act in government-approved ways. So we don't want to follow their lead. And as I said, that could then be locked into global databases, in the fight against terrorism and so on. And we do then see a situation where we lose control pretty much of our privacy. At the moment, we trade off privacy in things like social media because we see certain benefits. But it's limited. It's a limited trade-off. We have a choice about it. Once things like citizen ranking are used, we lose that ability to control things. And we shouldn't either be complacent, Amy, thinking that we live in benevolent systems and we'd never go that way, because we couldn't have predicted 10 years ago that we'd have a situation now with hate crime like we do in this country. So we do need to be vigilant.
There's so much we can talk about on all of these issues, but I am going to move on to talking about the news and how we approach that, which is something that interests me with my profession. But you mentioned that this year we're seeing a widening gap between legacy media and new media, and we're seeing new ways of interacting with the news, with AI generated headlines, articles and images. So what will this mean for fact checking, especially when we are seeing a lot of news portrayed on social media as well?
Yeah, well, really the future of, at least the foreseeable future of news, is tied up pretty much with the future of AI and digital tech generally. The two have now become inseparable. YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, even TikTok are all now seen as primary sources of news and editorial content, especially for those under 45. In this country, the only age groups that don't take their primary news from digital are over 45. So these platforms not only change the way we consume news, but they've, in a sense, democratized the process of creating and distributing news. And we have these so-called citizen journalists out there. We have everyday people helping police content online. As you say, that creates problems with fact-checking. And that's going to be a major challenge with the next generation of deepfake videos that are going to be produced by AI in real time. So in very quick time, these things will be produced, and it's harder. It takes a lot less time to make a deepfake even today than it does to tear it down, to disprove it. But that's going to get worse over the year ahead. But we are going to see, on the positive front, what we call immersive journalism, which uses things like virtual reality and augmented reality to allow us to, as it were, step into a news story. So, for example, a report from a disaster zone, like the fires in Los Angeles at the moment, could be viewed through a VR headset in real time, allowing the audience to emotionally connect with, say, the victims. 65% of news organizations in the US alone right now, Amy, are already experimenting with immersive technologies like that. And of course, AI can only offer us an approximate guess at the actual environment it's trying to show. So any use of virtual reality is going to have to be given a clear warning for the public so that we know what we're seeing is not necessarily exactly what's happening.
All very, very interesting and things that I hadn't considered myself. Now, the report also looks at breakthroughs with human implants, including AI-assisted cochlear or retinal implants. So what are some of the ethical implications of AI-assisted implants?
Well, there's the question of why the implant in the first place, and this is especially true of neural implants. Are we choosing it for a lifestyle, as a lifestyle option, or is it a medical necessity? And those two things have different sets of ethical requirements required. I mean, one of the areas where we will see implants very quickly now is spinal cord stimulators for people suffering chronic pain. And within a couple of years, we could see AI-enhanced stimulators that automatically adjust the level of stimulation according to the user's movements and pain levels. That could be very big in hospitals and really help lighten the load of the NHS in some ways. But there are questions about privacy. There are questions about security of data. Are we opening ourselves up to become hackable and trackable devices as we invite these implants into our bodies? There are questions about access levels. Does everybody in the community have access to the same tech, or do we end up with the tech haves and have-nots? And of course, with aging people, there are the questions of informed consent. How do we make sure that people have actually knowingly, willingly given their consent to having an implant? And again, there are those bigger ethical questions I mentioned earlier of the line between technology and humanity. So all of those things have to be taken into consideration now.
Just to bring this conversation to a close, and I know there's so much more that we could be discussing, but the report is titled Humanity versus Machine. So do you think we need to be prepared and maybe more discerning as well, and to see the value of humanity maybe over technology?
Yes, I think we do. I think we've come to accept the digitization of many of the activities of life. But in the report, we talk about the hyper digitalization that's coming, which is where companies, big tech companies in the main, are looking to digitize almost every activity of human life. If you look back over the last 10 years, it's phenomenal how much of our lives now and our activities have a digital element. And every time we use digital in those spaces, including cashlessness, by the way, we're generating data about ourselves. So we have to start thinking about how much we want known about us and how that is being used, instead of just accepting, as I said, that it's being used in some benevolent way. Big tech is not answerable to anyone but its shareholders. It's not answerable to a democratically elected government for the most part, which is why now we're moving to an online safety agreement or law. And Australia's banning social media for under 16s. They haven't said yet how they'll achieve that. That's the big question. But it is important that we start to limit our own use of AI and digital tech, and also to require our government representatives to do the same. Coincidentally, just last night, I was speaking in person to the local MP of my area in South Oxfordshire, and we had a long conversation about the need for ethical debates that involve more than government figures and big tech people. So we need, philosophers, physicists, biologists, engineers, technicians, even theologians to come into these conversations about the ethics of AI, because, as I say, the big question now is not just what's happening with tech, but what does it actually mean to be human, and how do we protect that?
Well, a very interesting conversation there. And thank you so much, Mal, for coming on to the programme today. It's been a pleasure to speak to you.